You're listening to the ESO Network, your station for all things geek.
Hello, world, and welcome to Tales from Hollywoodland, a veritable feast of movies, television, Broadway, showbiz story, and even a little bit of news and gossip with Julian Schlossberg, Arthur E. Friedman, and Stephen J. Rubin. Today, we're talking about famous Hollywood lavender marriages. And now, here's Steve.
Hi, Mike. Hi, Julian. Hi, Arthur. I am immediately going to turn over to Julian because I'm not quite sure where the term lavender came from and what it actually means.
I think if you can believe what one reads, and I'm always skeptical, in the early days of Hollywood, they were known as lavender lads. And this was a term for homosexuality. And it became the color that they wore, and they were the early gay activists. And that lavender, I think, has stuck pretty much even now with the LGBTQ group as well. So anyhow, most importantly, when we're talking about marriages of conveniences or partnerships of conveniences, in other words, to save supposedly the studio heads wanted the public not to know that a particular star was gay. And that was one of the many crazy things that were going on in the early 1900s and then the mid-1900s and then even to the end of the 1900s. So I think, Arthur, let's start with you. Who do you want to talk to? I'd like to just say one thing, before I begin, and that's the fact that there was a guy in vaudeville named Jack Pearl. He was huge. He went on early radio. He was huge. But he was not known as Jack Pearl. He was known as Baron Munchausen. And his famous line was it was German, and he says, "Was you there, Charlie? Was you there?" And that's what I want to say about this show today. We weren't there. We don't know. But we are going to talk about it, but we wasn't there. Okay.
Before we go to Arthur, let me jump in for a second, too. Arthur, we will eventually get to, we promise.
You were late today, Arthur.
Let's talk a little bit about the tone of Hollywood in the 1930s, going back that far, and certainly probably even before then. This is a period where each of the major studios had a fixer on the lot who, if one of the studio's major stars was caught in some kind of embarrassing situation or perhaps outed in some way, these fixers would go to the press and they'd work some kind of deal out to keep all this stuff out of the press. Even though he was not gay, I know that Errol Flynn kept those fixers busy, particularly at Warner Brothers, because he was having sex with everybody that was alive and female on the lot.
And also, Eddie Mannix was very famous as the fixer of MGM. If you want to look up Eddie Mannix, Mannix, like Mike's show years ago.
They made a movie about that not long ago. Steve, what was that movie?
Well, there was a movie with Adrian Brody about the story of George Reeves, who played the original Superman. And I'm forgetting the title, and we'll look it up. But
Danny DeVito ran what was supposed to be Confidential magazine, except they couldn't call it that. That's right. And he wasn't the first Superman, but the first Superman on television.
Right. Exactly. And there's a lot of controversy about George's, the way he died. It was supposedly, the official word was that George Reeves committed suicide, but there is evidence to lead one to believe that he might have been murdered. And
because
by the Lavender mob?
Lavender Hill mob.
Yes,
Lavender Hill mob.
So let's speak a little bit about Lavender, guys. I'm finally going to get in here. It's okay, Lavender, first of all, for our listeners, lavender cologne was Frank Sinatra's favorite cologne, just like orange was his favorite color. Lavender has a distinct aroma to it, and he loved lavender. There was also a song called Lavender Dilly Dilly. What the hell was the song?
Lavender blue. Dilly, dilly.
Lavender Dilly Dilly. Lavender green.
If you were King Dilly, I'd be your queen, or something like that.
I will just be completely honest that to this moment in time in my life, I never heard of the expression a lavender marriage. But it's an easy thing to figure out. You know, there are a lot of people who live together and are companions or whatever. And, you know, it comes back to Hollywood and these things. But I'm sure that there are things like whatever these things are that become glamorized in Hollywood or talked about in Hollywood. They're in any industry. We're human beings. And so we have these strange kind of social situations in so many different places, probably in the automobile industry, it's in the sports industry. Fact of the matter is, apparently 10% of our population is gay of some kind. That's what I hear as a stat. And so I guess that would mean that would be true also not only in Hollywood, but in baseball and football and in everything. You know, it's the way it is, and that's okay.
By the way, Arthur, excuse me for interrupting. The title of the George Reeves biopic we were discussing was called Hollywoodland, 2006.
Hollywoodland, really? Okay. Was that Adrian Brody?
That was.
Now, wasn't there another movie, though? There was another film, Steve. And I forgot what it is. So I'm just being honest. And
okay. In the Adrian Brody movie, Ben Affleck played George Reeves.
Yes. George Reeves, so we all know, if you all want to think about seeing Gone with the Wind, he was in Gone with the Wind. And then he became Superman in 1950s and was on television in Superman black and white, and a lot of times had ketchup stains on his outfit. That's true. Ketchup stains.
He's in the very first scene because he's one of the Tarrington twins.
Yes.
In the very first scene of Gone with the
Wind. He
Wind.
also had a major role as a supporting player in From Here to Eternity in 1953. And when they did the first test screenings, every time he appeared on camera, the audience laughed because they knew him as Superman. So guess whose part was reduced almost to nothing?
Yeah.
George Reeves.
Well, back to the lavender thing that we're talking about, or relationships. I think a lot of people, certainly in Hollywood, are familiar with the relationship between Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn, which lasted for many, many years. And apparently it turns out that they were both perhaps bisexual, and they were great companions, but they were not what you call lovers. But it was always sold and bought by the public that it was Tracy and Hepburn and all that stuff. Spencer Tracy was married. Katharine Hepburn, I don't think, was ever married. I may be mistaken.
No, she was. That. She was married.
She was married.
She had an early marriage, and then it was a divorce.
Yeah,
but she did.
Yeah,
but supposedly this idea of them having some kind of relationship was cooked up by a studio publicity department. Is that what you heard, Arthur?
Yes, not only that, they made movies together and they were hits.
Huge.
So why not? Why not? Then you have things that I think we're all familiar with, those in Hollywood. There's always a story of Cary Grant, who lived with Randolph Scott for quite some time. They lived in the same house in Beverly Hills. And perhaps they were bisexual, maybe. It's been said. There's all these kind of relationships. To me, if the people are happy, God bless them. And so onward to the lavender relationships, whatever they may be. Please, Julian, hello, Julian.
Well, it's a funny thing. And I'm always very loath to get involved in this kind of gossiping because I know for a fact I had my own problem. I went to a convention years ago, the motion picture distribution companies in New York are not millions of people. There's a small group. And I was at a convention in New Orleans, and one of the women executives tried to kiss me more than once. And I rejected it more than once. And when I got back to New York, a couple of people told me that this lady was going around saying that I was gay. I was gay in her mind because I wouldn't kiss her. I mean, and that could have been a real, had I been a public figure, that could have been very, distressing. It wasn't distressing to me because it was only a group of people. Those who knew me knew that, I'd been through a few ladies. And so I think I was okay about it. So I'm always concerned about this,
Julian, how aggressive was she? Did she throw you in a corner?
If only. No, not no.
Let's just be straight
no.
on, Julian. Are you Lavender? Come on.
Well, I'll have to talk to the 3 wives and 2 girlfriends, but I don't think so. Anyhow, that's my story. But as far as long-term relations, I saw them list Danny Kaye with Sylvia Fine, and I knew Sylvia Fine real well, a brilliant lyricist who wrote all his great Vessel with the Pestle and the Pestle with the whatever, and they had a long 47-year marriage. I mean, God knows what someone does on the side.
In the Laurence Olivier, a book, it stated that Laurence Olivier and Danny Kaye had a love affair. So again, we know the name, so it becomes shocking. But if it was Sam and Irving, no one would care. But there's a lot of Sam Irvings out there, and in different businesses.
But one of the problems is you can write that even if it's not true. Very, very hard. You can't sue. You can sue and say it's not true, but you can't win any money because you have to prove that you lost something by it. You can't just say it's ephemeral. You have to say, I lost a job because they said I was a gay man and I'm not. And it's so though I discount so much of it, Arthur. I just do. I think that people certainly have predilections. We all have our own kind of secrets that we don't want to share with anyone. But, someone strays for a day or 3, that doesn't make them gay. Makes them having a one-time experience.
We should also talk about the fact that, and Arthur, you did mention earlier that all professions have a lot of these dynamics, people trying to stay in the closet in the airline industry or automotive, et cetera. But show business is a business of people who are very creative in many ways, and their lifestyle is often very different from the way regular people who work in bakeries do. I mean, they're exposed to a lot of very attractive people in very intimate surroundings at times, and the opportunity for straying is probably more prevalent in show business than it is in any other industry, don't you think?
No. I believe it's all over the place.
Really?
Yeah. I believe it's in the garment center in New York. It's in the fashion industry. It's in the baking cookies. It's the human condition. It doesn't mean everybody does it, but a lot of people stray, and sometimes they stray in different ways, and they become Lavender. So,
well, I once again I agree with both of you, because the fact of the matter is that when you're on location in Thailand, thousands of miles away, with nobody there but someone gorgeous, and you're attracted and you have nothing to do because you're not shooting for 2 days, it's different than a lamp salesman. It just is. Yeah. So I'm with Arthur. I'm with Steve on the fact that it's a pretty different kind of a thing, but I'm with Arthur on the fact that everybody seems to stray. Everybody seems, not every human being.
Every industry. But Julian, the thing about when the Me Too movement started and became like, oh, Me Too, it's Harvey, it's now it's this guy and another producer or an actor. The fact of the matter, the Me Too thing has been happening in industries worldwide forever and ever. It became more of a power position versus a subservient position, and that's where it manifested strongly in the movie business in Hollywood. But that's happening in the cookie business. That stuff happens all the time.
One thing's for sure, in certain countries, being gay can be very dangerous. I mean, wasn't it true in England that you could go to prison for being gay for many years?
Absolutely right. It's
How about the Middle
absolutely
East?
right.
How about
Yeah.
the Middle East? How about the fallacy, the stupidity of that, where
Yeah, well,
they kill people for it's ridiculous.
It's true. And of
it,
course,
it,
when we
it's
talk about the Nazis and the Jews, then also they did not like homosexuals. In fact, they killed a lot of them in concentration camps.
and
Even though
ships
many of them
and
who were killing gay people were gay. That's also happened. Look at no one devastated the gay community more than Roy Cohn, who was gay,
yes.
but he did it for political things. You know,
But what I was going to say earlier was that whether it's the cookie company or whatever, they don't, everybody in the world, in our country anyhow, has two businesses, their business and show business, or their business and sports, because that's our royalty. Our royalty is the movie stars and the sports stars. And so the interest in their personal lives is much more than the lamp business or the cookie business, I'm afraid. So that's one of the other reasons that we seem to have. I mean, the fan magazines, even when I was growing up, I remember a whole story about Maureen O'Hara was caught necking with somebody in the back of a movie theater. I mean, I couldn't believe this is what they would be printing. It was a very strange time when all of this started to occur. And they have a whole story about Rudolph Valentino and other women. And so who knows? What we do know is there's a lot of interest in it.
Well, America up until the 50s, probably, well, probably past the 50s, maybe the 60s, has always been considered a very conservative, tight-lipped country, very Victorian values in many ways. And the only way to get that information was from Confidential magazine or all those tawdry. How is the National Enquirer still in print after all these years?
because people love to read that
They
stuff, and
do. It's
because they
at your
get the distribution places them at the stand where you pay in supermarkets, and it's a great business. Out of all the publications that have gone out of business, the rags, so to speak, are still in business and bigger than ever.
One of my first jobs in college during UCLA is I was a stringer for the National Enquirer. I wasn't a reporter, I was a researcher. They would call me up and give me a story, and I would have to make sure the facts were correct, which is surprising because you naturally assume that the National Enquirer is a bunch of hooey. But they didn't want their stories to be attacked in lawsuits, although they obviously were sued many times. But
Well, I have to say, Steve, that when they're talking about Martians, as they do often in the National Enquirer, or did, I have a hunch there couldn't be very much research on your part about the Martians.
well, they did offer to send me to Mars, but that's what my mother had said the same thing a few times. Although, no, I didn't work on the Martian stories. My stories were rather comical. They were doing a piece one day on the astrological signs of celebrity pets. So my job was to call up the celebrity agents and find out what Fido's birth sign was.
I see. No wonder you quit.
You know that everybody's familiar with Mel Brooks and Carl Reiner, the 2,000-year-old man.
Please don't tell me they're gay.
No, I didn't say that. No.
Lavender marriages, huh?
They're not, no, not to my knowledge. But there was also they did some other bits. There was also the interview thing of where Carl Reiner is interviewing Mel Brooks, who's a psychiatrist, and so Reiner says to him one time, he says, have you ever, Dr. Wood, have you ever, seen someone where you just couldn't cure them? There was you couldn't do it, He said, well, yeah, but, sometimes I've cured very, very amazing things that you won't even think about. So he said, well, give us an example. He said, well, there was this one woman, and all she used to do was she liked to sit at home and tear paper. And Carl Reiner says, she tear paper? She said, yeah, she just sat and tear paper. He said, how did you cure her? He said, one day I went over to her, I said, don't tear paper. Don't tear paper. And she stopped tearing paper. She said, but the other one was, there was this guy who loved his dog. And Reiner says, well, there's nothing abnormal about that. We all love a dog. He said, no, you don't get it. This guy really loved his dog. So there's those things too. Anyway, look, it's just a story. There's so many. Look, here's the thing. People, we all love friends, and we have companions, friends. People love companionship. And sometimes companionship comes with men and men and women, and men and women, and who the hell knows? But I'm for one just always saying, God bless anybody who's happy with their companions, and whatever the thing is, it's their business. We live in America; it's their business. However, as we say, the rags make a fortune on dropping these little lines and stories, the best business they do is with the secret things that we don't know, and sometimes they create these things too. Hard to sue, though.
I find it interesting that actors who have a very on-screen macho personality, who are leading men, and they play action roles, they're tough guys, and some of them had to be very careful about their sexual identity. For instance, we talk a lot about Rock Hudson. I mean, Rock Hudson in the 1950s, I believe his real name was Roy Fitzgerald. They turned him into Rock Hudson. Rock Hudson was a major action star in so many movies, and a kind of a mountain of male machismo. What do you guys have to say about Rock Hudson?
Well, he was a man who was quoted as saying, "Why would I eliminate half the human race from my sex life?"
Yeah.
So I thought he was a good actor. I thought he was terrific in the Doris Day movies at the time, and he was great in Giant. He was a good actor, and sadly, a terrible, sad ending with AIDS, and he looked, this hulk of a man had really shrunk with the illness. It was very sad to see.
Well, he was also, Julian, he was out. He was never closeted. He was out there. And everybody in Hollywood knew that Rock Hudson was gay, but the public just didn't know it.
That's right.
And
the public, like me, was shocked. I was shocked.
Well, and he was antithetical to anything like that because he was this big, great-looking guy, and and all that. But there was a manager. They did a series on this manager too, called Hollywood, I believe, with Rob Reiner. And there was a manager. I think his name was Wilson or something, who his whole specialty was having good-looking guys who happened to be gay, and make them big movie stars with names like Tab Hunter or Rock Hudson. There was more than that.
I don't know if Rory Calhoun was gay, but he certainly was part of this guy's stable.
George Nader was. Didn't become as famous as the Rock Hudsons and all that, but he had a stable of these guys, and that was just a thing out there. But
so Rock Hudson actually gets married at one point, but it's one of these Lavender marriages.
Exactly.
And was done for
Phyllis Gates, who he married, was an interior designer, and she wrote a book at the end of her life, and she said she didn't know, and then she did know, but the fact is he was the love of her life. So that's what Arthur is saying, companionship. It could be a lot of other things than going to bed.
True.
You bet.
Like you mentioned, Julian, Danny Kaye and his wife, Sylvia Fine Kaye, they were creative dynamite. And
they have a daughter named Dina, who's a journalist.
Right.
So, they lived a pretty interesting life.
Danny Kaye, just to depart from this for a second, was, when you think about it, a lot of people today just don't know who he was. This was like one of the greatest talents that ever lived. What a talent Danny Kaye was. Able to, dance, sing. He had a special kind of thing of talking fast or doing it, but he was just outstanding. And I have to say that the first person I once asked was with Eddie Fisher. I said, like, who's the best guy? Who's this? How was this guy? How was that guy? What was Elizabeth Taylor? Like, so on and so forth. And I said, who is the worst person in the business? And he said, Danny Kaye. I said, whoa, Danny Kaye of all things. Years later, I run into a guy who was a business manager who had all these clients, and I said, is there an asshole in your life?" He said, "Oh, dude, it was Danny Kaye." Unbelievable. But, there you go. You never know.
And yet he was someone who was very involved with helping children all over the world as the
Yes.
UN ambassador. So
Yes.
he may have had a dark side, but I have to think that Danny Kaye had a big heart, and I don't know what his
And a big wok.
he had a big what?
Wok.
He had a big wok, yeah, because he liked to
W-O-K.
cook. He was a great cook. I was thinking WALK, Julian. I thought you were going to talk to him like John Wayne had a big walk. And Duke walked into a bar.
So did Milton Berle.
Yes.
What a walk he had. Oh, boy.
And don't discount Forrest Tucker.
Here we go again. Once a week we discuss that. Let's talk a little bit about Montgomery Clift. Montgomery Clift. I always associate Montgomery Clift as Prue Pruitt, the private in the Army in From Here to Eternity, which is one of my all-time favorite movies. And he has a love affair with Donna Reed, and Donna Reed won the Oscar that year for Best Supporting Actor, as Frank Sinatra did for Best Supporting Actor. But Montgomery Clift was a man very uncomfortable in his own skin, from what I gather.
Well, yes, it's true. And not only was he rumored to be gay, but he also had a terrible drinking problem. He got into a horrible car accident, smashed up his face, took a lot of surgery to fix him up. He made a very interesting movie that very few people have seen called Wild River with Joe Van Fleet and I think Lee Remick. And he was a fine actor. He had the sensitivity, and of course, Elizabeth Taylor loved him. A Place in the Sun, not only in the movie, but in real life. She became a very big champion of his.
Yeah, and when he got into his traffic accident, I think he was either on his way leaving her house or on his way back or whatever from a party, but she helped nurse him back to health. She was very close with him.
Yeah.
And Montgomery Clift even when he started to make movies again with his quote unquote new face, he was always terrific.
There was, I don't know what you call these lavender marriages and stuff like that, but there was Hollywood was always famous for putting together stars so they could have, get publicity and all that stuff. So Sandra Dee, who I knew very well, told us a great story. They put her together on a date one night with George Hamilton while they were trying to establish George Hamilton. So it would be great. They take pictures outside of restaurants. And George Hamilton takes Sandy home one night after a date. He has not made it yet, but he's on his way. And the date was set up by the studio. And he has a home in the flats of Beverly Hills. And she goes home with him and opens the door. And inside, there's nothing in the house. It's empty. So she says, "George, where's your furniture?" He says, "That's not important. What's important is that they see me in this house." He said, "Where do you sleep?" He said, "I sleep on the floor." And so, the image, it's always the image of what it could be like. So anyway, that thing went nowhere, by the way, but that was a pretty good story. Julian, I am curious to know something, having something and nothing to do with what we're talking about. Elia Kazan worked with a lot of those guys in the late 40s, certainly the 50s. And he was such a great director in this movie, and you knew him well. Having nothing to do with what we're talking about, tell us about Elia Kazan, please.
Well, I can bring him into the discussion in the movie that let's start out with the fact he won 2 Academy Awards for On the Waterfront and Gentleman's Agreement, and he made wonderful movies, and an incredible man who started the first director on Broadway of the very first time Death of a Salesman, Streetcar Named Desire, Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, Sweet Bird of Youth. I mean, it's just gigantic, his credits. But he said the worst movie he ever made was with Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn. And most people don't even know. It's called Sea of Grass. sea of grass. He wanted to go on location. MGM wouldn't let him. But he did say that Katharine Hepburn was totally devoted to Spencer Tracy, so much so that when he went on drinking binges, she would literally stay outside his hotel room with a blanket and sleep there if he wouldn't let her in. So they really did care for one another. It wasn't Hollywood publicity.
What was Kazan's magic? What made him so great?
Well, he had the most fertile mind I had ever encountered until I met Mike Nichols and Elaine May. But up until then, Leah Kazan, you would walk down the street with him and he would start talking about a person that we were passing or a store he frequented. I mean, walking and talking to him was like taking a powerful drug, except you never had to come down. You were just up there. You were up there and you were caught up in what I thought was a maelstrom of intelligence and excitement and observations. He was just really special.
I know he worked with Brando. Did he ever work with James Dean?
He discovered James Dean. He put him in East of Eden. That was his first movie. He also was the first person to put Lee Remick in a movie and Face in the Crowd. I mean, he really had a great eye for talent. And, you look at those films that he made, invariably, I mean, I think Warren's first movie is Splendor in the Grass, Warren Beatty. So, I mean, invariably, he launched many, many famous actors' careers. But it's Brando in Streetcar where he pushed Tennessee Williams to accept Brando, who was an unknown actor. He had done a little play on Broadway in a small role with Paul Muni. And he went and Tennessee absolutely approved him. It's one of the greatest performances anyone could ever do. Yeah. Stanley Kowalski in Streetcar Named Desire. I only wish I had seen it on Broadway, but the movie itself is so powerful. But people who've seen it on Broadway said there was nothing like it ever. That performance that he did.
I want to just get back to our Lavender Hill Mob subject for a second. Growing up in LA, I remember one of the things I heard in high school, and this was, again, I grew up in a very conservative environment. Nobody was telling me the latest gay news ever. But I heard that Raymond Burr, who was the great the great lawyer on television, Mr. Perry Mason himself, was involved in a relationship with Gomer Pyle, USMC, and Jim Nabors. And the thought of Jim Nabors and Raymond Burr together, to me, was a bit controversial at the time.
He was a very popular man, Raymond Burr, among fellow actors. He was a very kind man, charitable man, loved to grow gardenias, had lots of gardenias. And interestingly enough, generally, like, let's take Carroll O'Connor, a fine Shakespearean actor before All in the Family. But after All in the Family, he did In the Heat of the Night, but he never had that kind of prominence. But Burr went from Perry Mason to Ironsides, and that was another pretty successful show.
Sure.
So it's interesting. But we have to remember that the most frightening kind of villain in almost all of Hitchcock's movies is Raymond Burr in Rear Window.
Lars Thorwall.
There you go. And he was.
Raymond Burr. He was gay. And Jim Nabors apparently was gay as well. It's
funny because, growing up watching Gomer Pyle, with that squeaky voice, Sergeant Carter. And then you hear Jim Nabors sing with this magnificent baritone. It was like night and day. I mean, Jim Nabors was blessed with one of the great baritone voices.
Great bit.
Especially when he sang night and day.
And Jackie Gleason, but the best I ever heard of those lines was when he did Joe the bartender, and Frank Fontaine, who did the crazy Guggenheim character, was also a great singer. And so he was just so totally out of character, you didn't expect it. And they got big ratings, for stuff like that. I once asked old friend actor Alan Rich, who appeared in something with Van Johnson. I said, is Van Johnson gay, Alan? He says, he's gay. He's so gay, he's thrilled. That's how gay Van Johnson is. And what a movie star he was. He was a great movie star.
And he was a terrific painter. He painted giant portraits. And I was lucky enough to direct him in a movie that I did where he was the host called Going Hollywood, the War Years. And I loved working with him. He was really great. And
was he wearing red socks?
He absolutely was wearing red socks. And I think I said this. Go ahead, Steve.
No, I was just going to say he was one of the most popular actors in America during the war.
Well, one of the few, because he was unable to join the armed forces because he had a plate in his head. He had been in a terrible car accident. He was very, very close to Keenan Wynn and Keenan Wynn's wife. And I think after they divorced, Keenan Wynn and his wife, I think Van may have married her and he had a child. So, I mean, these fellows that we're talking about are clearly, if they are gay, they're also bisexual.
Woody Allen's great line, if you're bisexual, doubles your chances for a date on Saturday night.
Well, yeah, and I think in Seinfeld they said, and there's nothing wrong with that.
That's right.
Well, it's funny. When do you guys think that it started to change in terms of acceptance of gay marriages and gay lifestyles? When do you think it began to change? Was it the introduction of was it the internet? I mean, because the internet's only 25, 30 years old. What do you think?
Well, I don't know if it has changed in a lot of the countries, Steve. I still think that there's a lot of people who feel that this is against God and against religion and whatever. So it's I'm afraid we still have a lot of primitive thoughts in this country. But, the most important thing is what Arthur said, and I agree with him. And that is that if you find someone you love, you should be able to be and spend time with them. That's what matters. Because at the end, it's over pretty quickly.
Oh. I once read a book, a wonderful little book about a baseball player named Billy Beane. There's two Billy Beans. One runs the Oakland A's, who everybody knows about, but there was a ball player, pretty good ball player named Billy Beane, who was gay and played his career closeted, and how painful that was and what that was like. And that was 70s, 80s, 90s. He was closeted in San Diego. And you read that story, it just tears your heart out of what living that kind of a life is, closeted. Ultimately, he became the representative in Major League Baseball. The commissioner made him a representative to go around to every ball team and just say, if this is what you guys are, I'll be happy to talk to you. Let's get you out of this problem.
I remember I got to know Arthur Lawrence, who wrote Gypsy and West Side Story.
Sure.
And he had an affair with Farley Granger. And at Farley Granger's height, Farley Granger was petrified to be found out. It's just exactly what you're saying, Arthur, that he did everything he could to hide the fact that was his interest. So it was a sad situation, and I think it still exists, but not anywhere near as bad as it was.
No, but Steve said, and you're right, it's really geographical, Steve. In San Francisco, it's fine. In New York City, it's okay. And LA is fine. But you go to certain places in this country, and it's it's something you don't publicize.
Especially when you and I don't want to get political here, but some administrations are very, very anti-gay, and I think that that hurts the situation. What's the story on Greta Garbo? Now, Greta Garbo is known for that very famous phrase, "I want to be alone." She spent a lot of her life alone. Was she ever married, Julian?
I don't believe so. I'm not sure, though, Steve. I don't know, but I don't think she was. I know that she did have some very close male friends, and she was rumored to have some very close women friends. But again, rumor. It's not, unless back to was you there, Charlie? Unless you were in that room, you don't know.
That's right. Red Button said that if you're lonely and your choice in life is bestiality, at the very least, go with a horse. This way you'll always get a ride home. That's what Red Button said. Yes. Julian, did Gazan direct East of Eden? I'm not aware that he did.
Yes.
Oh, he did?
Yes.
Good movie. Yeah.
Yeah, he was very close to John Steinbeck. He became very close to the writers he worked with, and he was an interesting man because he loved working on the script. Because later he became a writer. He wrote many books, and he wrote a big bestseller that they made into a movie called The Arrangement. Not a great movie, but that was a huge bestseller.
Kirk Douglas.
Yes, Kirk Douglas. But he was really hurt because Marlon Brando had agreed to do it. And he was so excited about working with Brando because not only had they done Waterfront, but they had done Viva Zapata together and had remained friends. And he wanted Brando very badly. And Brando initially said he would do it and then didn't. And it really, really hurt him very much.
Interesting thing on companionship and how, we all love friends. We all love friendships without question. But if you listen to two ladies who had affairs with people of power, one being Monica Lewinsky, who told her that the thing about Bill Clinton was he said he was lonely as president of the United States. I'm lonely, and he needed the relationship. And then you talk to the girl who slept with Andrew Cuomo when he was governor of New York. He had the same exact thing. He said, I'm lonely. How about us going out tonight? Something like that. So companionship comes in all kinds of forms, and as we've said here, we defend all of it. Nobody's breaking the law, and have at it at their friendships and relationships. So back to the Lavender thing. I never knew there was such a thing as a Lavender, but there's a lot of people who have those relationships. I won't mention their names, but there's a major mogul in New York with a major girl mogul. So it's not uncommon. I'm
trying to think of.
And as you said earlier, it's not really confined to Hollywood. It's something that goes on all over the world.
Do either of you guys know of an actor who came out and then lost his career? I was trying to think of someone because obviously there are people who worked less, but I'm just wondering if there are cases of perceived straight actors who declared themselves to be gay and then lost their careers. I mean, Tab Hunter was a big star in the 50s. I remember seeing him in the original Damn Yankees, and then he comes out later on, but didn't have much of a career after that.
Well,
question.
It was not a big movie. It was a big play, big Broadway play.
Right.
But it was Stanley Donen, my friend, did that movie, and he had no. They gave him almost no budget for two movies, and he did it with George Abbott, Damn Yankees and Pajama Game. I don't know, Steve. I don't know about that. I don't know. For example, I don't know the historic lineage, but I don't know what would have happened with Rock Hudson had he made movies after it became public. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think he was making films.
These days, I think that there's been a turn. If you watch television, if you watch the movies, particularly in television, the presence of gay characters is now universal. They're everywhere. They have gay shows, they have gay character actors, they have gay leading actors, lesbian actors. It seems that Hollywood is the most liberal. Well, we know that Hollywood's liberal, obviously, but in terms of subject matter, there's no holds barred. In fact, we're coming into the Oscars in March, and one of the biggest movies of the year is this Emilia Perez, and the star of the movie, who's been nominated for Best Actress, is a trans actor. So
you've seen the movie, Steve?
I only watched the first half hour. I have to tell you, I just turned it off after a while. It wasn't really my cup of tea, I will admit that, but it is getting a lot of attention, both good and bad. Some people in the Mexican community say it's very unrealistic the way the Mexican side of the story is told. And there's been some pushback on the lady who's nominated for Best Actress for some of her internet comments. So
Did
there's
you all read Peter Bart's column today in Deadline Hollywood?
tell us the gist of it because I missed it.
The gist is simply that these movies that are being nominated for Oscars are stories that perhaps are not commercial. I think that's the gist of it. Did you read it, Julian?
Yes, I did. You sent it.
Yeah,
So I did read it.
So many
Yeah.
movies that get nominated are not what you call box office pictures. But what's happened along those lines is where years ago they would make story-driven movies with big stars and great stories and great directors. There's a lack of that today, and so the movies that are serious without stars, but with amazing, perhaps unique storylines, are taken seriously. And rather than voting for Spider-Man, Batman, or the rest of these kind of things, they wind up getting nominated for Oscars. And the result of which is a lot of times the Oscar show, which used to get 50, 60, 70 million viewers, now gets maybe 15 million viewers because the movies are unpopular. I
don't even know.
Nora is one of those movies, correct? Or Brazil, whatever.
Yeah, I mean, Amelia Perez has been seen by very few people. People don't hear about these movies. I think that in the Hollywood community hears about them first. They hear about them at the Sundance Film Festival or at Toronto or these other places. And they play festivals, which are seen by a very small percentage of the public. And then a lot of the companies that release these movies are streaming companies, and it's more important for them to be seen on their streaming service than in the theater. So they get a limited theatrical box office for a few weeks. And if you don't see it then, you got to wait for it to come on the streamer. A few years ago, Moonlight won the Best Picture of the Year award. A little story takes place in Florida about the Black community. Not a very commercial movie at all. I don't even know if it made any money, and it was the Best Picture of the Year.
You had said earlier, Steve, to go back to what was not being done on television. I think one of the early persons who played a gay man on TV was Billy Crystal in Soap. Is that right?
Yes.
Is that what? Yeah, and that was quite a breakthrough. I don't know if it was the only time that happened. I mean, sure, it happened maybe before, but it was kind of hinted on. Anytime Paul Lynde was anywhere, it was hinted on without it being blatant. But with Billy Crystal on Soap, it was right out there.
Of course, we can cross to the subject very easily of the movies that have been made with gay themes, and how Brokeback Mountain some years ago really broke through the mainstream public. A hell of a good movie. I forget who directed that, Steve. Do you remember? Brokeback Mountain?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of myself.
But that's a whole subject within the subject, and that is, gay themed movies. Was there anything in the 50s, guys?
Well, there was Otto Preminger did the movie Advise and Consent.
Yes.
And one of the subplots in that was the fact that a senator had a gay affair. I think Don Murray played the senator.
Exactly, but what a great movie.
Brokeback Mountain, by the way, was directed by Ang Lee.
Ang Lee, okay. Advise and Consent, my goodness. Charles Lawton, one of the great actors of all time, let alone movie actors, but that was a hell of a picture. But that was key to the whole nomination of the cabinet head, which we were all going through now, the various cabinet positions trying to be filled. And that was like a big deal.
It's interesting that we're talking about Lavender marriages, and I think a lot of people would say that Charles Lawton and Elsa Lancaster would qualify, perhaps.
Very likely.
And but Lawton in Advise and Consent and witness for the prosecution, he's extraordinary. And his only directing you guys know what it is, I'm sure, was an incredible success.
Tell us.
Come on, Steve. You got to tell me. Gregory Peck, Robert Mitchum, Love, Hate.
Did he?
Night of the Hunter.
Night of the Hunter.
There
That
you
was
go.
Charles Lawton?
Yeah, he
Whoa.
directed it.
Directed it, Charles
Scary
Lawton.
movie.
Yeah, and boy, and Scorsese's remake was pretty frightening too, with De Niro in it. But Mitchum, oh my God, that
It
was
was incredible. And let's not forget about Washington D.C. as it relates to Lavender. Lavender. Franklin Delano Roosevelt had a Lavender thing going. Dwight Eisenhower apparently had it with when he was general. There are a lot of those.
Are you saying that?
Wait. We got to be careful. This means that the person involved in the marriage is gay. Also, Dwight was not gay.
I'm just talking. I'm sorry.
Amy was not gay.
Well, also the Monica Lewinsky and Bill Clinton thing. It's just companionship. People need to.
Julian, your friends Elaine May and Mike Nichols probably did more for accepting gay characters with their movie The Birdcage than any movie I've ever seen. The pairing of Nathan Lane and Robin Williams as those characters, they were the most lovable, fun characters I've ever seen in that arena. And
Yes.
and that movie.
And how about Hank Azaria?
Hank Azaria.
He was unbelievable.
Aga something Spartacus or whatever his name.
Augustus, I think Augustus Spartacus, something like that.
And when Robin Williams is trying to straighten out Nathan Lane a little bit before he meets Gene Hackman's senator, he says to Nathan Lane, he says, I'm gonna mention this other person, John Wayne. And then Nathan Lane gets up to do the John Wayne walk, and it is hysterical.
Well, there's a great song there too. A great song about that they do.
He walks. And he walks.
Guys, out of all of the great Broadway shows I've ever seen, and I've seen a lot of the big hits, La Cage aux Folles is as great as any. What an audience reaction that show got. I saw Gene Barry.
Arthur, when they ran it on Broadway, did they run it in English? I assume they did, of course.
Of course. It was Gene Barry and George Hearn.
George Hearn and Gene Barry. But the audience, Jerry Herman wrote these songs. And Jerry Herman was, again, nobody thinks of him like Irving Berlin and Cole Porter. Jerry Herman was a hit machine. The score from La Cage aux Folles had at least 2 show-stopping songs. Literally, the audience would get up at the end and sing with it,
Yeah, the one that is done all the time in any kind of a gay party is I Am What I Am.
I am what I am, yeah.
Yeah.
I am my own. What's the next lyric, Julian? I am what I am. I am my own simple equation. I think it is.
My mother worshipped that. My mother worshipped that soundtrack almost to the point where she wore out the cassette I gave her. And my mother was not a technical person, but she could pop that cassette in and sing to those songs. Absolutely. But The Birdcage, which was not a musical, was equally as fun.
Oh, it was great. Wonderful movie. I was once sitting with Milton Berle up at the Friars Club one late afternoon, and Milton said it was the raincoat with the fedora hat, the cigar, and in walks Gene Barry. So this is years after La Cage aux Folles. And they knew each other from childhood. I mean, Gene Barry was around for many, many years, very handsome man. And so Milton just went like, Gene, how you doing, Gene? It's good to see you. And he said, oh, Milton's terrible. What's wrong? He said, all they want me to do is pansies. Ever since La Cage aux Folles, they want me to do pansies. And Milton's response was, Gene, it's a living. It's a living. What a great show that was. Great movie, too.
Well, it's interesting because an actor who I consider to be one of the most macho actors just got through a 15-year association as James Bond. Daniel Craig just took a very daring performance playing a gay man in a movie called Queer.
You see it?
I did not see it. I'm not rushing out to see it, but the word on the street is that he's terrific. And I got news for you. If he had been under contract to the Broccolis, who do the Bond movies, he would have never made that movie.
He wouldn't have been able to make that movie.
Right. Exactly.
Is that streaming or is that theatrical? Steve?
It's a good question, Arthur. I'm sure it's around. I don't know how much of a theatrical release it will get, but
my wife Barbara watched the original Mutiny on the Bounty the other night.
Oh, with Clark Gable,
and just couldn't. She never had seen it, and she just went crazy how great this movie was, and it is a great movie.
It's Charles Lawton again.
Again, Charles Lawton. Yeah, what a movie, huh?
Yeah,
made it for $2 million in 1935, Jules.
And you could see how handsome he was, Mr. Clark Gable, without his mustache.
Without his mustache, yeah.
And then they remade it 30 years later with Marlon Brando, and it bombed.
And they did it again with
Marlon bought an island and a couple of wives.
Yes, he was lonely. But what about there was another Mutiny on the Bounty. Do you remember it, guys? Early 1980s. Is
it with Anthony Hopkins? Anthony Hopkins.
The Bounty.
Oh, The Bounty, right.
Oh, The Bounty, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. I do remember it, even though I think it's forgettable.
Yeah, well, it's forgettable. But you talk about some of the quality of some of those great movies out of the 30s and certainly the 40s. I mean, you mentioned before Elia Kazan's Gentleman's Agreement. What a movie! I mean, you ain't seeing that kind of movie anywhere today with that kind of quality.
I was thinking,
and it's interesting too, because all the men who ran the studios, but one, were Jewish and wouldn't make Gentleman's Agreement. Only Darryl Zanuck, the non-Jew, agreed to make the movie.
I was thinking of movies that have closeted characters. Laurence Olivier plays Crassus in Spartacus for Stanley Kubrick in 1960. And the whole scene between him and Tony Curtis is filled with all of this innuendo. And it's 1960, so everything had to be couched very carefully. Even though it was coming to the end of the censorship era, it still was very much considered. That Olivier gives that speech about snails and oysters, or
Well, didn't they initially cut it out of the movie, Steve? Wasn't it on the first release? I think it was.
You might be right. Absolutely.
Want to see a great little movie, guys? See Boys in the Band. Billy Friedkin directed.
Oh yeah.
Cliff Gorman. Oh, hell of a little movie.
Yeah, it was a hell of a play too. And sometimes, in my case, because I lived in New York all my life, I would see the play first and then the movie. And no matter how good that movie was, somehow the play, to me, because you're right there, it's so visceral, and you're feeling it like celluloid cannot do.
Well, did I see that Larry Luckenbill died recently, Julian?
Yes. Yep.
I'm sorry. We've actually come to the end of our show, Arthur. We're going to have to talk about Larry some other time. I'm going to turn it over to our wonderful producer and host, Mike Faber. It's all yours, Mike.
Thank you, Steve. You've reached the end of this episode of Tales from Hollywoodland podcast. Always remember, we couldn't do this without you. We want to hear from you guys, so please write us anytime at talesfromhollywoodland@gmail.com. Remember, you could also find us wherever fine podcasts are found, and now you could even find us up on our YouTube channel. If you made it this far into this episode, why not subscribe and give us a thumbs up? Or if you're listening to us, please give us 5 stars. If you're into social media, please check us out over on Instagram and Facebook. Before we get out of here, let's check with the guys and see what's happening this week on their podcast. Julian, who are we talking to this week?
This week is the prime antagonist of Avatar, an actor named Stephen Lang, who has been around a long time in Tombstone and Gettysburg. And I'll tell you, speaking of Broadway, he was the original Colonel Jessup in the movie we all love that Jack Nicholson did.
That is awesome.
Good men.
Yep.
A few good men. Thank you, Steve.
Hey, it goes with the topic in some ways tonight. So there you go.
There you go.
But it was also about a few good women as well.
That's true.
Yes.
Steve, what's going on with Saturday night at the movies?
We are talking Oscars with Pete Hammond, the wonderful film critic for Deadline. And Pete and I get into a very animated discussion about all of the Oscar-nominated movies and which ones he thinks will be the ones winning all the awards. I'm hoping Wicked wins Best Picture, but I don't know if that's going to happen.
One could hope. There's a lot of decent stuff, but there hasn't been Wicked is the closest thing to a blockbuster that's nominated.
Exactly.
So, Arthur, what's coming up next week on our podcast?
Next week, we are going to be interviewing Seth Berg, a big name in the industry of music, a man who, amongst many other things, represents the estates of people like Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin and Nat Cole. And I can finally tell my Maria Cole story. What a story. One of the most beautiful women in the whole world, who was Nat's widow. And
Peggy Lee.
Peggy Lee. Yes. Seth is a very fascinating guy. He'll have a lot of stories to tell. And folks, you'd be amazed at how much business these artists who passed away do, still with their records playing on Spotify and YouTube, all over the place. There's fortunes that come in, even at $0.25 cent a play. It's unbelievable. But Seth will be our guest. We'll look forward to that.
That is awesome. On behalf of Steve, Arthur, and Julian, thanks again for listening. This is your producer and announcer, Mike Faber. We will see you here next time on Tales from Hollywoodland. Your Hollywood adventure starts right here.
As the temperatures get cooler, let's think back to a time where monsters fascinated our young minds, where haunted houses and flying saucers were the stuff of fantastical dreams. Come relive those wonderful times with us every Monday at 5 p.m. It's Monster Attack on the ESO Network.
This has been a broadcast of the ESO Network. Be part of the crew and help support our shows by donating to our ESO Patreon or by shopping at the TeePublic store, which can all be found at www.esonetwork.com. The ESO Network, your station for all things geek.